All right, so a whole bunch of financial agreements and financial deals have been struck as part of the outcomes of the Delhi G20 summit, from digital public infrastructure, which India is very, very keen on pushing across the world, to a new green climate finance action plan. And of course, there is the contentious issue of debt restructuring of infrastructure projects. To discuss all this and more and what the Delhi G20 summit has achieved in financial terms, in the financial realm, I'm now joined by Mr. K.V. Subramanian. He's the former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Thank you very much, Mr. Subramanian, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. First things first, this whole push about digital public infrastructure for financial transactions, the whole world has seen how India's UPI has been very successful. India has bilateral agreements with a few individual countries, Singapore, France, etc. But the first time that the G20 has spent a substantial amount of time in the joint declaration talking about creating a digital public infrastructure for financial transactions. What do you make of that?
I think that really signals India as the digital leader of the world. India has demonstrated very clearly how during COVID we used the digital public infrastructure to really reach out to the common person in a way that was unprecedented. That kind of reach wouldn't have been possible during COVID, but for the digital public infrastructure that we have built. And now India is demonstrating to the world that what it has done at home is what the rest of the world can do as well. So it clearly marks out as India as a digital leader. It will help in bringing productivity gains, as we are seeing in India itself, and more importantly, enable growth to become inclusive.
One of the other issues has been this new mechanism for green climate action financing. Now, some years ago, there was this green climate fund that was announced, $100 billion that the developed countries were supposed to give to developing countries. I don't know how much of that money has actually been transferred. But it boils down to this moot point, which is that the developed countries, the industrialized countries, which have polluted the world for the last 200, 300 years because of industrialization and beyond that, are simply unwilling to cough up the money. And every few years, we just keep coming up with these new terms and new mechanisms. Ultimately, it doesn't amount to much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true. But what we have to realize here is that you are asking the current population, in the developed economies to actually cough up money for sins committed by their, by their ancestors, their fathers, grandfathers, and beyond. And that is not something that becomes politically very feasible, saying, your parents or grandparents actually, enjoyed at your expense, so you cough up the money. You can imagine how politically acceptable that will be. That's, the reason that, this has not gone too far. I am, very clear that, of course, the problems of climate change that we are seeing is primarily because of the sins of the advanced economies. In fact, if we talk about the stock of, global carbon emissions, almost 95% or even 99% of it is, that stock has been created by the advanced economies. But I think, in the Delhi Declaration, there has been progress beyond these usual, words that are spoken, because for the first time, there is also an emphasis on enabling more private finance to come in. And I think that is something which is a very welcome move. And by now, there is definitely a realization that mere words are not going to help in tackling this problem of climate change.
I also want to talk to you about debt restructuring, particularly for infrastructure projects. And we have seen how smaller countries in Asia, in Africa, reeling under Chinese debt, have been protesting. There have been almost revolts in some of those countries. In light of that, the announcement of this economic corridor between India, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, going all the way to Western Europe, the question comes back to, again, how are you going to finance this? I mean, is it going to be public finances? Is it going to be private finances? Who is going to foot the bill?
So there are two issues that you are raising here, and I want to answer both of these. The first question that you raised was about overall debt distress itself, and here the G20 and especially India's presidency has clearly marked out uncharted territory by bringing the global debt restructuring roundtable, which is a significant improvement on the common framework that was there, which was not going too far. Firstly, it was not applicable to many of the middle income countries like Sri Lanka, and the processes were very slow because it included creditors that were beyond the Paris Club. So that's one issue. And here the headway that has been made through the global debt restructuring roundtable, I think, is definitely noteworthy. The second point that you're talking about, which is, in terms of infrastructure, the fact that what is envisaged here is essentially a new Silk Route, and that is primarily to enable trade at a time when the trend against globalization, against trade seems to be very high, especially given the focus on that every country seems to have on its own taking care of its own sort of economy. Now here the clearly infrastructure financing will have to be done significantly by the public exchequer, in each of these countries, because infrastructure is something where private financing is not going to come in, in large numbers. So the way India has demonstrated now with the infrastructure creation here, that's how the other countries in this corridor will have to actually match up.
All right, Mr. K.V. Subramanian, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. All right, with that, we take a quick break here on the special broadcast, but right on the other side of this break, my colleague Ridhima will join us.